Hi guys, this is John from Sonic Drive Studio. Welcome to episode 2 of our drum mixing tutorial series. In the previous episode we discussed the David Bendeth expansion for Steven Slate Drums 4, and in this episode we're going to look at the Terry Date expansion, which is an amazing pack. If you're a fan of bands like Deftones, Pantera, Limp Bizkit, bands of the nu metal genre or other cool 90s metal or rock bands, then the Terry Date expansion is a must-have because his signature sound is really there and the samples sound really nice too. I'm a huge Deftones fan myself, and the White Pony album is really great in terms of drum sounds. And a special treat that Steven Slate arranged for this pack is that the actual snare from White Pony is in here, so that's just really cool for the fans. Before we dive in, I'd like to ask you to hit subscribe to our channel, and you can also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/sonicdrivestudio. Alright, let's take a look. First off, let me say that in the previous video I showed the processing that I'm doing on the master fader as well as on the drum bus. I'll go over the settings on the drum bus briefly, but if you want to know what I'm doing on the master fader, you're going to have to look at the previous episode. Alright, let's start off by taking a listen. We're going to listen to this drum part with all the effects enabled. Here we go. Great, so as you can hear, these samples really have their signature sound. Terry Date and Steven Slate did a great job on making these. Now let's also take a listen without the processing so you can hear the difference. Yeah, that also sounds really good. I mean, these samples were processed really well, and even without additional processing, they can work pretty well in a mix. But I think the processing that I'm doing here just makes them sound more alive and exciting, and a bit more fat. So for even better comparison, let's do another very small section with the processing again. So as you can probably hear, one of the main things that I like to do is exaggerate the room sounds. So the room sounds a bit bigger, the kick sounds a bit weightier, and stuff like that. So let's take a look at the processing. We're going to start off by looking at the kick again. Just as in the previous video, I'm starting my chain with the trimmer and the virtual preamp collection. Now, with this pack, the virtual tape machines are doing a huge job in fattening up the kick, especially in the toms and the snare, of course. I found that the unprocessed samples lacked a little bit of depth in the low end, and the virtual tape machines really helps with that. So we can take a listen to the kick drum here and compare it with and without the virtual tape machines on. So I'll start with the plugin on, and then I'll turn it off. Okay, so this is a good example of how I like to use the virtual tape machines, and I always put them on the channels before I start mixing. So without the tape machines, the kick drum sounds a little bit hollow, and with the tape machine on, the low end becomes a bit more fat and 3D. Next up, we have the virtual mix rack. I'm not doing a whole lot here. I'm just adding a little bit of thickness with the Revival plugin, just to add even more thickness to the low end. Cutting out a little bit of excess low rumble at 30 Hz. And I'm also cutting out some low mids. Let's take a listen to what this is doing. So what I like to do usually is look at the low-mid frequencies in kick drums and toms as well, and scoop out some areas that sound a little bit boxy. I want the kick drum to have a lot of impact, and those frequencies tend to take the impact away a little. Then, just as in the previous video, I'm using the monster on the kick drum. It's making quite a big difference. Take a listen. It gives it a bit more sustain and punch. Now let's A/B all the plugins on this track to hear the difference. So a lot of what's changed on the kick drum regarding processing is that it's just a bit warmer and more punchy. The Virtual Console collection, the Virtual Preamp collection, and the Virtual Tape machines are doing a whole lot in that regard. So with the Terry Date drums, I really recommend that you slap those on to see how it enhances the sound. Let's move on to the snare. Let's do a quick A/B first with all the processing on. It's a great sound, really high-pitched and punchy snare. Actually, I'm not sure, but I believe that this is the snare that was used on the White Pony record from Deftones. And now without processing. So there is a difference there. Let's take a look. Once again, just as with every other channel, trimmer and the Virtual Preamp collection. Virtual Tape machines, and then aside from VCC, which I also use on every channel as you saw, we have custom series lift setup. This is here just to enhance the high and low end of the snare a little bit. Let's A/B. Custom Series Lift is one of my favorite processors from Slate. I use it on drums all the time, so check that one out. And the monster again with the Snare Slammer preset. The presets are great for these plugins, so don't be shy and just try them out. I tend to tweak the settings afterwards often, but they provide great starting points. Let's A/B this one as well. The amount of power, life, and size this plugin adds to your drums is just incredible, as you can hear. Without the processor on, it just sounds a little bit pokey. And when the monster is applied, the snare comes to life and the sustain gets bigger. It's just a great plugin. And it's free. It's crazy. And then finally, the Eiosis Air EQ, which I'm also using in this instance to cut out a ring. Let's A/B. This one is definitely not necessary, but I just prefer it without the ringing. Then we're also sending the snare over to a reverb track, which I'll show you. I'm using LX480 again. On the played room algorithm, you can see the main settings here. We can do a quick A/B of this one as well. So it adds some nice room sound. All right, let's go to the toms. On the virtual mix rack here, I have a few things going on, but not a whole lot. I'm using the Custom Series Lift to add some high end to the toms, so you can hear the stick attack a little bit better. It just sound a little bit more clear. Let's A/B. Then next up, we're using FGS to cut some unwanted boxy mids. Let's AB. That makes a big difference to me as well. And for toms, I always recommend to search that area for unwanted frequencies. And then finally, for the toms, we're using the bomber to add a little bit of excitement. Let's AB that one as well. So with the bomber on, they sound a bit more exciting and they jump out of the mix a little bit better. Great. Not doing anything on the hi-hat other than the virtual console collection, the virtual tape machines, and the virtual preamp. Of course, there are things you can do to shape your hi-hat even more, like remove mid-frequencies or enhance the high end. But in this case, I felt that the hi-hat sounded great by itself. Then the overheads. Let's take a listen. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's bypass the processing. And again, with the processing on. In this case, the processing just makes the overhead mic sound a little bit more cohesive and glued together, and the high end is a little bit less harsh. In this case, the virtual tape machines is also an important plugin. It just makes your overhead mic sound more smooth, punchy, and the high end just sounds a bit more pleasing. Then I'm not doing a whole lot again on the virtual mix rack. I'm removing a little bit of high end with FGN here, about 1.6 dBs, just to make them a little bit less harsh. With all the processing on the drum bus going on, sometimes the overheads can get a bit overemphasized. In that case, what I like to do is go back to the overhead channels and remove some high end to compensate. So that's all that this is doing. I love the high shelf on the FGN for stuff like this. And then just as in the previous video, I'm using FG401 on the overheads preset to make them sound a bit more smooth. And then onto our final channel, the room channel. Let's listen with the processing on. Those room mics sound really exciting. It's great. Now let's try them without processing. And again with processing. So even without the plugins on, the room mics sound great. I just like to beef them up a little bit more to give them a bit more of an exciting sound. Aside from VTM, VCC, and VPC, the Monster is the only plugin on here. So this one is doing all the compression, and it's great for that. So one thing that's really cool about this plugin, especially for room mics, is the high frequency detection control. This can really help to make your cymbals and overheads sound less harsh. I'll fiddle with the control so you can really hear what it does. So when I turned the control way up, you could really hear how the cymbals got ducked down, which is really cool and really handy for room mics, because I don't want my overhead mics to get overshadowed in the high end by the room tracks. I did show the drum bus in the previous video, but I'm just going to show this to you real quickly. Again, Monster. it adds a huge amount of mojo to your drums. And then after that, the FG Gray. This is doing about 1 dB of gain reduction just to glue everything together. Plus, I really like the coloring that FG Gray adds. Let's AB the plugins on this channel. Okay, that's it for the Terry Date Drums episode. Stay tuned for more episodes that are coming soon. We still have some other drum packs to go over. So please hit subscribe, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/sonicdrivestudio to stay up to date, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.